While we're getting this up, I'm just introducing myself. I'm Phi Laidler. I head up the consulting practice at SDL Partners, Telco 2 initiative. Can I just ask everyone here, who here knows about Telco 2? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we've got a few people here, some over here, good. Anyway, just to explain who we are before I dive in, we're a consulting, oops, this is giving me a big grief. Am I going to put it on? All right, no problem. We're a consulting, research and events business. We write research primarily on business model innovation and growth in digital for telecommunications. We have several publications. Many of the operators globally sign up and follow our research. The other activity we undertake is consulting. That's what I head up. And we work with operators. We work with technology companies. Again, looking at new areas of growth and of changing business models. And finally, we have an events business. We used to run very big events. We now run much smaller ones. We do those all the time over the world, similar to these here. What I'd like to do today is talk about three things. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about our vision of the challenges that face the telecoms industry and the structural challenges that we believe has held the industry back in the past. We all know that telecoms hasn't demonstrated the same level of innovation that some other industries have. We all know that it hasn't been as effective at branching out to adjacent industries, starting up new digital initiatives. It's been a disappointment for us in particular, because for the last 10 years, Telco 2 has been trying to encourage the industry to evolve its business model and to succeed in new areas adjacent to its core. But we think that's about to change, and I'd like to explain why. The second thing I'd like to do is talk about new services which I think the industry should be addressing for new growth. And that's around the new business model, and it's around how it goes about innovating for the new business model. And finally, I'd just like to challenge you here today with a potential piece of work that the Open Roads community could do in trying to assess digital maturity and think about how we transition from where we are today to a more digitally engaged model. A little bit of background here. What we've done is we've got three companies, Vodafone, Google, and Unilever. And the first one we're arguing is an infrastructure business. The second one we're arguing is a platform. And the third we're arguing is a product business. Essentially, Vodafone, it has more than 3 products, they'll tell you that, but they've essentially got 3 core products. Google's got a dozen or so, and then if you like, it's got thousands of others that it supports, and Unilever has about 100. Vodafone's in 28 countries, the other 2 are global. They're all 3 about the same size in terms of revenue, and they've all got sort of, well, not quite comparable, but they've got EBITDA. Vodafone has come down a bit for the industry. Most industry players are in the early 30s. Vodafone's about 28, Google's at 32, and Unilever is looking quite low at 19. When you get below EBITDA, things start to change. Because of the very significant investment in its network, Vodafone has got a very significant depreciation amortization charge that leaves it with very low EBIT figure. Google, on the other hand, far lower charge, leaves it with a higher EBITDA. And interestingly, Unilever, that's actually outsourced nearly all its production and distribution, has very little write-off to depreciation, and therefore it starts coming back into line with Google. If we look at the capital deployment, here is the capital that Vodafone has got tied up in its infrastructure, very significant. There's a big number here with Google, but most of this is cash, so it doesn't really count. Yeah? Most of this is cash that Google has in its war chest if it needs to act against something. It's not stuff that's tied up in capital, and relatively little again with Unilever. The result of this is essentially that the return on capital experienced by Vodafone is very low, and actually the price to book is actually less than 1. That means that the theoretical market price divided by the net value, book value, is actually less than 1. So it suggests that they're value destroying. Every dollar that Vodafone invests destroys value for its investors. It's a bit harsh, but that's currently the case. Compared to the other 2, very high rates of capital return on capital and very high price to book value. What may surprise you is that actually it's Unilever that's achieving the highest return on capital and the highest price to book value. So here's an old bricks and mortar company, but that's been very successful. So 3 very different models. got a capital-intensive model with relatively low innovation and very low return on capital. We've got a well-known platform here, Google, which has got high capex and opex, but very high opex, a lot of innovation and pretty medium returns on capital. We've got an old-fashioned business, very old business, but it's very innovative and it achieves a very high return on capital. And we'd argue that most telecoms players would like to see some of this, and they'd like to transform this model to look a little bit more like this one and or this one here. And these are not just physical world players. We'd argue that some digital companies are actually more product companies than they are platform companies, although, again, people like Salesforce are looking to become more like platform businesses. Now, there's nothing wrong with this business in a stable, predictable environment. Yeah, this is a good utility balance sheet, yeah, or P&L rather. The challenge we face as an industry is that we don't have a good, stable environment. We have an environment where we are being disrupted, where we are seeing significant change, and therefore this model is really not fit for purpose. There's actually an urgent need for the industry to respond and change. And I've got a quick question to you. You've got some little voting pads on your tables. Unfortunately, they're not quite enough. So if you have to share with them, please turn around to your neighbour on your right and see if you can agree. If you can't, turn to your neighbour on your left. And I want you just to ask yourself a quick question. If you could just pick up the little pads in front of you, you should pick them with numbers. The first one is, what should the response for the industry be to the current challenges it faces? And I've kept it very simple, a bit unfair. I haven't given you more than 3 options. However, do you think that the response should be to focus on cost? Do you think you're facing a utility challenge? The thing here is to drive down costs as far as possible, and the low-cost survivor will come through. And that's a view that you're recognizing your voice and your messaging revenues are going away. You're recognizing you cannot compete against the digital players in digital. All you can do is focus on getting that cheap connectivity and make it available to everyone else at the lowest price possible. That's a valid strategy. Or do you think, no, we need to actually fundamentally change our business model and grow our revenues and address new market segments to customers? And we'll go on to which those might be. Or do you think, well, actually, all this talk, we've been talking about it for a long while, but what we just need to do is keep going, focus on our markets, and just evolve it. And all of this is stuff that we've heard over and over again. And at the end of the day, we just need to keep steady, calm heads. So you can vote as many times as you like. You'll remember just the last button you pressed. Should be at least 30 of you. Can the last people have a go? Just 1 or 2 more votes. See where you stand. Any more? Any more takers? Any more takers? Going. Go on, that'll do. Okay, great. Good. I didn't give you much choice. I'm kind of interested by the brave person. If you're brave, do you want to explain why you think actually it's important to focus on price? You don't have to, because I'm very unfairly singling you out. So if you'd rather not, you can stay quiet. And some people saying, look, this is all hype. That's interesting. But luckily for me, most of the people in the room agree that the thing to do is to grow revenues. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So that's rather good. We mentioned this structure. We've exaggerated this slightly, but to the best of our understanding, this is the structure that they face. So we've got a big investment in depreciation and infrastructure, a huge OPEX devoted to managing that investment, relatively little around what I would call customer care, innovation, marketing, service creation, and a relatively small profit. The ideal would be to grow more revenues, spend a lot more on that customer innovation piece. In other words, look a little bit more like a Google, not quite as much, obviously, as a Unilever, and reduce these two. So these two things have to come together. We need to reduce the amount that we spend on infrastructure, we need to reduce the amount that we spend on managing that infrastructure, and we need to increase the amount that we spend on innovating with that more flexible and agile infrastructure. And we argue that actually the event of cloud technologies, it's not just virtualization, it's the cloud technologies and cloud business practices are an opportunity for the industry to do this. Because it will help us to lower capital and these things. We put a lot of thought into what is it going to take, how do we think about making that change? And we've done a lot of work with the Telco 2 Transformation Index, which some of you may be familiar with, done a lot of work on operator agility, And this is a kind of another iteration of that. We've broken down the dimensions into these 6 dimensions. We've got these, which we consider to be the capabilities and investments, essentially your infrastructure and how you manage customer engagement. And then we've got these transformation management, which is to do with organization, architecture, products and services. And I'm going to go through these in a bit more detail in a second now. And this is the framework we're using to think about the activities of the business. And then, of course, the alignment across these corresponds to your strategy. So I'm not going to go through this now because we don't have a huge amount of time. But what I'm saying today is that telcos today exhibit a set of practices, a set of procedures, a set of the way that we do things, and we need to evolve to something like this. You never really get there. It's an open road because you never reach the end. You're always continuously evolving. But certainly, this is the next stage of where the industry needs to evolve to. And I'd like to home in on particular on product and service creation, because we believe that this is more an outcome than a thing you can change. But we believe it really highlights where the industry needs to change the most. Typically today, an operator will have an idea, and they'll then try and do a business plan. And that's where the problems start, because the business plan that an operator writes before it launches a new service, and let's take a service such as a service that notifies you the person you tried to call is now available. They were not available online, they're now connected, you get a text saying the person is available. Typically, the operator has to do a business plan. Business plans will want to demonstrate certainty about making a return. And by definition, the only way you can demonstrate certainty is to provide evidence. In other words, you can find that other people have done the same successfully. That in itself automatically rules you out doing a load of innovative things, because you can only do what others have done and proven at least 2 years ago. So you've got a fundamental problem. From day one, you're limiting your innovation. Also, you have to have a significant investment, and the reason you have to have a significant investment is you're now going to start designing and building your solution. Then maybe a year down the line, you may test your solution. You'll obviously find it's not working very well. You'll fix it, and you may get a launch. Might go okay, and then maybe 2 years later, you might think about doing a refresh. I'm afraid that still today is how most operators do most of their innovation. Contrast that with what many players, including some very big players, do today. They'll have an idea, they'll start building against that idea. They'll start developing a solution. And then after a few iterations, they'll do a beta test. If that goes well, they'll launch. And then they'll iterate and iterate and iterate. And they'll iterate live. And they'll iterate around all the time, focusing on the customer experience. It's a very different model. Maybe somewhere around here, they may work out how they think they can make money, but not up here. So a fundamentally different lean startup, agile methodology. We all know this. We all know that's how they do it. We all know how that's we do it. We've got to work out how we can move between them. Now, the first thing to notice, of course, that this is a lot cheaper than that up there. Costs less money to do. The second thing to notice is it's obviously a lot faster. The third thing is it's got a lot more checkpoints. So if things aren't working, you can stop. Once this thing gets approved, no matter what you find, the company will still start building it because it's got the money. And then finally, it stays up to date because you're building in ongoing iteration, ongoing innovation, responding to market, responding to customer needs. Finally, what you do is you don't do it once, you can do it 4 or 5 times. If some of things fail fast, they fail fast, the others go on. This is a lot more expensive. It costs more money to do innovation that way, but you do a lot more innovation and you bring a lot more products to market, and you're in a real position to grow a lot more new service and revenues. What we've done is we've taken that and we've said, okay, let's try and imagine a very dangerous thing. We're not building a business plan. A very dangerous thing. We try to say, well, imagine all the kind of new services that we might be able to create on the back of NFV, SDN, and cloud technologies, and the appropriate systems and business practices on top of that underlying technology. So it's a lot more than just investing in NFV, SDN. It's also changing the business practice. It's changing the systems that are supporting those business practices. And we came up essentially with a whole bunch of new services that we believe operators can offer, which we put into 4 categories. These are connect services. They're essentially improvements. They're turning connectivity more into a cloud-like service, into the way that enterprises and consumers consume cloud services. they should be doing increasingly the same with communication services. So it's really about things like network on demand, it's things about what we're calling VMNO, and it's about very flexible, low investment, try and scalable approaches to connectivity. But it's essentially the same business, it's connectivity. Perform is really much more about delivering content and delivering content in ways that are very difficult to do without having a more integrated approach to your network and to your content and application delivery. And that includes SaaS optimization as well as content delivery services and much more integration of the network. So rather than the network being the problem that you've got to get past in order to deliver services, it becomes much more part of the solution for delivering services to your upstream partners. A lot more two-sided business models here. You may not get paid by your existing customers, you may be paid by what you consider today to be your competitors or your OTT competitors. So it's a very different approach, different business models here. And finally, a whole bunch of new services associated specifically with capturing, analyzing, controlling information at the edge. So rather than being a broadcast environment, we're talking about an environment where data is coming into the network and having to be managed more systematically across the network, having to be filtered, having to be having control, having to have security applied. So there's a much bigger role for the network to support these huge number of new devices and sensors and manage more and more the interaction with them, but not necessarily in a central location, in a mixture of within the network and a central location. And then finally, there's a bunch of services where operators are trying and do try to operate today that we've called digital agility. Arguably, these services haven't got a lot to do with a network. They may have to do with payments capabilities, they may have to do with identity, they may have to do with consumer data sets. So they're not necessarily leveraging assets and attributes that are network assets. They could be leveraging other data assets that belong to the enterprise. But we believe that if you can adopt this agile, innovative, open, partner-based approach, you will be able to be more successful in this space as well. So it's a bit of a two-stage jump, but this is the area that we think there's a lot of opportunity. But we think operators are being held back. They've been held back by their DNA. They've been held back by the way they think about and approach innovation in their core. And we'd argue it's quite difficult to do that on the periphery if you don't drive the change in the core. Some people may or may not disagree. I don't want to spend too long on this, but we basically created a timeline. We had the services launched over the timeline, and we did some forecasting, because we're consultants. And we started with this view, a telco. This would be a telco in a country like the UK. Might look a little bit like BT and E knit together if you look at the numbers. And we ran the model, and of course the model showed that we could reverse what's a decline into a growth story. And if you open up the growth story, you get this sort of breakdown between the digital agility, the connect service, the perform, and the capture, analyze, control. And when we show this to operators, a lot of operators say to us, well, this looks very small, and this looks very small. We won't do it. They're missing the point, because it looks very small in 2021 because it's only just taking off. But actually, a lot of the growth in that angle is here. So you need to look at the growth, you need to look further out. And what we're saying is you've got to look at all of these services. There's no killer application. There's just a killer approach to delivering innovation. And you've got to think about all these services. And in some cases, they'll be much bigger than this. And we've made very conservative assumptions, but that's how we're thinking about it. And I'm conscious that we haven't got time today to go through these in detail, but we have spent time defining each of these. And if you want, I think we're going to be sharing this, so you'll be able to read these in more detail at your leisure. But we've gone into sharing and defining what do these new services look like, what's the business model that applies to the new services, how do we see them being successful, what are the services and deployments that we've seen in the market today, and basic descriptions of what this is. So, I encourage you to look at that. Coming back to this, thinking about how do we evaluate where we are and where we need to get to. The main dimensions we talked about are infrastructure operations, which is really the key questions we need to be asking here are about our network, about our IT, about our capabilities, and the key KPIs that we need to be measuring to assess where we are on their customer engagement. I think it's pretty obvious that telcos have done a lot better, actually, in recent past. There's still a lot of catching up to do in the models used. And then I'm going to just jump through these quickly because they're pretty self-explanatory. Kind of important, very important to think about partnerships and business models. And this is an area where I think operators in particular have done poorly. If you talk to companies who have tried to engage operators in partnerships, this is very painful. There's lots of horrible stories about it taking longer to write an NDA with a telco than to launch a whole business from scratch. And it's very, very frustrating for organizations who are trying to engage with the operator community that this seems to take just far too long, and there's not an approach. And culture, very important. You can't underestimate culture. At the same time, there is a tendency in the industry to say, we don't have it in our DNA, we can't do this, we can't change it, it's fixed within us. I think it's a problem, but it's not insurmountable, and you can drive and change culture, and lots of organizations have done it, and the industry can do it too. So I'm just very conscious that I'm being told here I'm running out of time. So I'm going to just add one last note. It's not just how you're scoring on here that counts. It's the linkages between these that counts. So it's no good having great infrastructure and operations if your organizational architecture isn't aligned to it. So one last word is that if you're trying to assess your digital maturity, you've also got to make sure that your performance across these and the linkages with them are aligned. And in fact, that's probably where you need to start fixing things before you try to move it on and progress it. So what I wanted to suggest for the Open Roads community is a potential approach, trying to make use of some of this. So select some service concepts, build hypothesis, where do we need to get to in order to support those service concepts, create some sort of target, metrics, say, well, it would need to be here, 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 and here across these dimensions. And then if there's a candidate operator that wants to have a go at conducting a maturity assessment, we can look at, well, this is where you're at, this is where we think you need to get to support the service concepts, and here's the gap analysis. What could we get from that? Well, at the very minimum, we'd learn something. Hopefully, we'd actually end up with something that's reusable and could be applied across more operators as a framework from Open Roads. And actually, potentially, it can actually be the basis of, once we've got the diagnosis of the gap, it's the basis of actually driving a proof of value exercise to move and do something concrete. So that's my suggestion. And I wanted just to ask you here today what you thought of that. So keypads again. Those of you without one, talk to your left-hand neighbor or your right-hand neighbor. And if you can't agree with either of them, well, come and see me afterwards. Essentially, what I've set out there, what I think we should do is undertake a maturity assessment and use that to inform some proof of value exercise. If you think that this is, it's an interesting idea, but actually it's been done elsewhere, and it's not really the remit of this group to address that, fine. If you think this is different and ambitious, but it's a bit too ambitious, and we need something that's a little bit more, not trying to change things across the board, but a bit more focused on specific areas, you vote here. If you think, look, there's value in this, I like it, but I need more detail. You've gone very quickly, Phil. You've been here 20 minutes. I haven't seen enough. So come back with some more detail on exactly what you're proposing to do. Or if you think, yep, I've seen enough. Let's do this right away. Let's get going. Then that would be very nice, but we'll see. Then you vote for. So just based on what you've seen, I know that's not a lot, but I've only had 25 minutes. So based on what you've seen, is this the right sort of initiative that the Open Roads community should be considering? So I'd just like to get your views. We can get 4 or 5 more views before we wrap up. I've only got a minute. It's over there. Okay, any more? I think we are done. Great. Fantastic. So a couple of people think it's been done elsewhere. That's fair enough. Some think this is a bit too ambitious, which is possible. It's certainly ambitious. But actually, it's looking good because there's, between these two groups here, there's a lot of enthusiasm. Some of you would like to have more detail. That's understandable. I've rushed through this very quickly. Some of you think we should move straight away. So that's really interesting. I think we'll be sharing that with you during the course of the next 2 or 3 days. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the other things from the other speakers on this very exciting initiative. Thank you.